Beis, Chapter 2, Mishna Daled. We'll just read through from the beginning that we covered Friday, and then we will go and then continue from where we left off. So just to read from the beginning of the Mishnah, Stam Nedarim lahachmer. An unclear neder has to be treated stringently, uperushim lahakal. But when they are explained as to what the intent was when the person making the neder meant, then we can be lenient. Ketzad, what's the example? If a person says, this food is upon me like salted meat or like poured wine, im shal shamayim nodar, if his intent was, when he said basar maliach, salted meat or poured wine, he meant of heaven, meaning a carbon, usher, then the food is forbidden. Im shal avodah zara nodar, if he meant to say it should be like the sacrifice of idol worship, that's what his intention, mutter, and the food is permitted. The imstam, and if there's no clarification, he doesn't remember what he meant, usher, the food is forbidden, because we say that when the person made the vow, his intention was to make it in a correct way, unless we know otherwise. Hare like a chayrim. The next example was a person says, this should be like chayrim. The food should be like chayrim. Im kachayrim shol shamayim aser. If his intention was, when he said chayrim, meant the chayrim of heaven, meaning something that is, through the word chayrim, dedicated to the Beis HaMikdash, then the food is aser. Im kachayrim shol kohanim mutter. And if, let's say, he meant like the chayrim that goes to the kohanim, it's a chayrim for the kohanim, that was his intention, mutter, then it's permissible. Vim stam aser, and if it's unclear, it is forbidden. Okay, so this is what we read. This is what we did Friday. Now the Mishnah continues with more examples of this, and now we'll get into explaining. Hareya like a meiser. The wording the person said when he made it there was that this loaf of bread should be to me like meiser. Meiser. What does he mean? Im kameiser beheman adar. If his intention when he made the vow was that saying it should be like meiser means like the meiser of an animal, like the tithing of the animal that's done, usser, then the food is forbidden. V'mishal goyren, but if he meant like the meiser, the 10th of the grain, mutter, then it's permissible. The imstam usser, and if it's unclear what he meant, the food is forbidden. Okay, that's the words. Let's explain. This person said, this loaf should be like meiser. We don't know what kind of meiser he means. He can mean two things. There's two possible things he can mean. He can mean that he wants this bread to be like meiser behema. What's meiser behema? Just to make it, because read to you from the notes, a person who owns cattle, sheep, or goats is biblically obligated to bring 1/10 of the animals born each year as offerings in the Beis HaMikdash. That's meiser behema. Meiser of an animal. He gathers, so what does he do? He gathers all the newborn animals into a pen that has an opening wide enough for only one animal to pass through at a time. Counting the animals as they leave the pen, he marks every 10th one with red paint, saying, this is meiser. Okay, by calling it meiser, he sanctifies it and makes it prohibited as an offering. Thus, it is something that is forbidden by a person's declaration. As we've been learning until now, one of the ways to make a neder is to link something to something that became forbidden through your voluntary declaration. Okay, well, that's interesting here about the meiser. We learned before that it has to be voluntary. And this is not voluntary. Just realized that question. I don't know. Okay, but the point here is that the meiser behema becomes forbidden through your declaration. We don't make the declaration, it's not going to be forbidden. And nothing will be, actually, if you don't take off the meiser from the flock, from the animals, they're not forbidden. They're all permissible. It's just that you got to make sure that you go ahead and separate the meiser. So you have every 10th, you count the animals, and every 10th you declare it as sanctified. So you're linking your food that you're forbidden to something that becomes forbidden through your declaration. If that's what he meant, then okay, then he made the proper linkage. The food is forbidden. But if, let's say, his intention was, when he said like meiser, it means like the meiser of grain. Now the meiser of grain, we know, refers to what goes to a Levi. You have new grain. The first separation from the grain, you separate truma for the kohen. The next thing you do is you separate meiser, 1/10 of what's left for the Levi. We know there's other things that are also done. You got to separate Meiser Sheni, the second Meiser. Other years it's Meiser Ani. That's another thing that you have to do. But this person said, if this person said, I want it to be like Meiser, means I want it to be like the Meiser, the tithing of grain, then when a person says that, the word Meiser, generally, when you just say Meiser of a grain, you mean what goes to the Levi. What goes to the Levi is permitted for anybody to eat. Truma only Kohanim can eat. Meiser, it belongs to the Levi, but it can feed it to anybody he wants. So Meiser is essentially a permitted food. So if his intention was to say that this loaf of bread is like the Meiser, is like the tithing of grain, then he linked it to something permissible. And therefore, there's not an effective neder, the food is permitted. V'im stam, and if let's say he didn't clarify, we don't have a clarification. He says, I don't remember what I meant. So then we follow the rule that the Mishnah has been working with, and that is the assumption that when we have an unclear neder, the assumption, and we have a choice of what he meant. Either he meant to say it in an effective way or to say it in an ineffective way. We say that because he's trying to make this thing forbidden, that's what he's trying to do. We assume that he's doing it correctly unless he specifies otherwise that he was doing it incorrectly. Okay. Next example. Okay. Harei katruma. A person says that this loaf of bread should be upon me like truma. Truma, we said before, where you separate, that goes to the kohanim. You're allowed to eat truma? No. If it's the truma of the grain, you're not allowed to eat it, right? Now, what other possibility could he mean when he says it's like truma? And the answer is, says the Mishnah, im ketrumas halishka nodar. If let's say when he vowed, his intention was like the separation of the chamber. The separation of the chamber is referring that we know that every person in the times of the Beis HaMikdash had to give a half a shekel towards the Kabbanis Tzibur, towards the communal sacrifices. The money was collected and put into a special chamber. And then a couple of times a year, they took the money from that chamber to buy the sacrifices and everything that was needed for the Kabbanis Tzibur, for the communal sacrifices. So if his intention was to say this loaf of bread should be like, now those monies were referred to as Trumas Halishka, the separation of the chamber, because at the end of the day, that's how they were used. But they were essentially already sanctified when each person gave his half shekel, and he said, this is my half shekel, he made it sanctified, and therefore through his declaration, it became something he's not allowed to use. Or anybody can use. No one can use it. So therefore, if when he said, this loaf of bread should be like truma to me, and he tells us his intention was like the truma salishka, like the money that comes out of the chamber, the money, the half shekel money that everybody dedicates towards the Beis HaMikdash, that's what he meant, then usher, the food is forbidden. He linked it to something that is forbidden through a person's declaration. The imishal geiren, but if his intention was to link it to the truma of the grain, mutter, then it's permissible. Now, let's stop for a second. Truma is forbidden to eat, right? Truma is forbidden to eat. No. So you're linking it to something forbidden. Is truma forbidden through a person's declaration? Don't you have to separate truma and say it's truma? It's not automatically truma. You have to separate it. You have to designate it as truma. So why, when you link it to truma, do we say, and tell us that's your intention, we say mutter is permissible? That means it's an ineffective neder. Why? So explanation given is the following. When you have grain, right, the grain of that year, you didn't separate truma from it. You didn't separate meiser from it. You can't eat it. It's called tevel. Okay? Now, when you then go and designate the portion for truma, and you designate the portions for meiser, right? Then the leftover grain becomes permissible. But the truma, but the portion that's truma, and we say that portion of truma exists within that, right? We that portion, was it ever permissible? It wasn't permissible in the beginning, and it's not permissible now. And therefore, although to make this specific grain truma, you have to designate it as truma, but it doesn't change the status of that grain. It was prohibited before, and it's prohibited now. So you're not linking it to something that when we talk about linking it to a carbon, we're saying You take something that was permissible and prohibit it through your declaration, which is what you're doing now. But if something is forbidden before and forbidden after, before the declaration is forbidden, after the declaration is forbidden, then that's not a proper linkage either. So it's not, the reason it's not a proper linkage here is not because you linked it to something permissible like Meiser that goes to the Levi, but because you're linking it to something that although for it to become Truma, it needs your designation and declaration, nonetheless, the point is you didn't take something permissible and make it forbidden, which is what you're trying to do when you make a neder. And if you're going to link it to something else, it's got to be something similar. Something that was forbidden before and became forbidden through declaration. That's not true by Truma. And therefore, it's not true by Truma. It's ineffective if you link it to that. The imstam, and if, let's say, again, it's unclear what your intention was, usher, then we say the food is forbidden because we assume that you linked it in the proper way to the Trumas Halishka. Divrei Rebbe Meir, these are the words of Rebbe Meir. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. Shavua Tov, Thank
you, Rabbi.